Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 98, A Pirate's Life for Me. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing good right now. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world? Have you able to get back to putting words on paper after the move and the unpacking and all that?
No, not yet. I finished with the moving stuff. I've finished unpacking and settling in, so I'm all good to go as far as that goes. And then I got a cold, so I was sick. I finally feel better today, but yeah, I haven't been able to do anything writing-wise really, so I'm looking forward again to getting back to that. Hopefully now I'll feel better. But yeah, so everything's kind of been on hold. This January was kind of a wash, and now even the first week of February, I haven't been able to do anything, unfortunately. I really need to start getting back into things.
And you know what? Life happens.
Yeah, it does.
I have been moving forward on the stories. I haven't put any words to paper since the last recording we did, but I'm actually I have a big chunk of time today. So I'm planning to hopefully finish one chapter, maybe even start another chapter today and just keep pushing that forward. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a good day today. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned, but I know I talked previously in previous podcasts about the World Bible that I was creating, and I don't think I ever told you that it came out in the end up to this point at 77 pages.
Excellent. That's a lot. It's
a lot. But it's all summaries of the stories and character development summaries, and in addition to stuff like what are some of the rules that I've made for this world? You know, the technology that's being used, what it's, what is it good for? What are its flaws? And
it's that's good. It's very important. You need that stuff.
Yeah, because I forget it.
yeah, you have to. As long as it's organized and you can find it again.
For example, I have this material called conformable composite, which essentially can be molecularly designed to do almost anything. Imagine like a portable 3D printer that just takes this and do anything you want with this material.
Okay.
And so in this book, the bad guys have figured out a way to break the molecular bonds of this material, which is used for everything in the good guys universe. So, but it's important that I put in what are the cool things about the technology that I'm incorporating into the story, and then what are its flaws, because it can't all be 100%. Otherwise, that's no fun. It's got to have drawbacks.
Yeah, of course.
So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
While I was not feeling well, I was rewatching the first season of Severance on Apple TV.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, you haven't seen it. So yeah, that's probably something we should discuss on this podcast.
Okay.
Very interesting show, and I'd be curious to get your take on it.
All right, cool.
Well,
you don't steer me wrong when you make recommendations for stuff to watch. So yeah, we'll add that to the list, definitely.
Not usually. We'll see. It's a very strange show is the thing, but it's I don't know. I think it's really cool.
I've heard of it, and I've heard it's well reviewed.
Yeah. So season 2 is airing now. So it's okay. That's why I rewatched.
Do you know how many?
No, I don't know. I don't know if they have a plan yet. But I watched the first season when it aired. It seems like a long time ago now. It's probably been a few years. And I was like, I want to see the second season. I didn't really remember what was going on in the first season, so I wanted to rewatch it again. So that's why I caught up on that again. But yeah, maybe we'll discuss that at some point.
And I'm continuing to watch Doctor Who, the Ninth Doctor.
Oh, cool.
I just watch an episode a day. That's it. I think that's it. I did get the copy of Skyward so that we can talk about that in a few weeks.
Oh,
So I'm going
okay.
to start reading that.
Reading, or you have the audiobook?
I read. I like to
Okay.
read. I've been listening to stuff in audio recently because it's been convenient, like when I'm Ubering my kid to school. I've seen this movie that we're going to talk about today, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. I don't know how many times. This was another favorite of my offspring when, at a very, very young age. The favorite scene was when Will throws his sword and it lands in the door, blocking. That was my offspring's favorite scene. That was worth laughter every single time. So anyway, I did listen to that while driving for this week because I have seen it so many times. So it's very interesting to listen to these movies as opposed to watching them, because without the visual interface, I'm paying attention to different things.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I prefer to read books.
Yeah. I'm the same. I only started listening to audiobooks relatively recently, within the last couple of years, just driving more and going on hikes. I would listen to audiobooks, and then we moved a fair amount of distance. So I had many hours on the road. So I was listening to an audiobook there. Otherwise I'll read when I'm just at home.
Are you ready to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah, let's dig in.
Today we're talking about the story told in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and I will read the summary that comes up on IMDb. Captain Jack Sparrow arrives at Port Royal in the Caribbean without a ship or crew. His timing is inopportune, however, because later that evening the town is besieged by a pirate ship. The pirates kidnap the governor's daughter Elizabeth, who's in possession of a valuable coin that is linked to a curse that has transformed the pirates into the undead. A gallant blacksmith, in love with Elizabeth, allies with Sparrow in pursuit of the pirates. Did you enjoy this movie?
Yeah, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite trilogies and series as a whole. It's just a lot of fun. It's not taking things too seriously when you're watching a movie based off of a Disney ride called Pirates of the Caribbean. I was surprised. I was not expecting much when I first went and saw this movie in the theater, because it's based off of the ride. Like, okay, what is this going to be? What are they going to do with this? How is this going to work? But, kudos to the writers and the directors. They made something really fun out of it. And I think the introduction of Jack Sparrow is one of the all-time great intros of a character in a movie, with him coming in on the mast of the sinking boat to step right onto the dock. And then he bribes the guy. It tells us immediately this is someone who could make the best of a bad situation, someone who's unflappable in the face of adversity. And it's just such a fun scene. It's so unexpected. Yeah, I don't know. I thought the movie held up really well upon rewatch. I hadn't seen it in many, many years, so it was fun to watch it again. I may end up watching some others in the series now. Story-wise, I love how they did a lot. I mean, we've talked about this before in a lot of movies and a lot of stories that worked well. They're really good at doing setups and payoffs in this movie. Even with the introduction of the characters, you have how Jack crosses paths with Elizabeth, right? His first introduction to her, sees her splashed into the water after falling off the cliff, and then he goes to save her. So immediately they're connected. We see that Jack, despite being a pirate and maybe self-serving to an extent, is still a decent person and he has a heart. And then when he meets Will Turner, we see that both he and Will are competent swordsmen, which is something that leads to Jack trusting Will's skills later in the story. Yeah, and it's just both of those introductions are fun and sort of set the tone of what's to come in the story. I think there's other setups like the Aztec medallion we get introduced early on, pretty much like in the prologue of the story, right? The backstory we get where Will and Elizabeth meet when they're young, and she takes the medallion, the Aztec medallion. So it's set up there. And then they mention the Curse of the Black Pearl, and those things get connected. So it's like they're laying these little breadcrumbs and they're paying them off throughout the story. I thought it was just very well done from that perspective. And then I loved how they show us the first time they show us the curse. We get to see the pirate's skeletal arm as he reaches through the prison cage to grab Captain Jack. Thought that was brilliant. It's just a one little snippet, and you're like, oh, I see what's going on here. And then the second reveal, when Barbossa is telling Elizabeth about the curse, and she goes out onto the ship, and we see the whole crew as skeletons. I thought that was also really well done. It was very creepy and horrific, but also at the same time fun and in the style of this movie. So it didn't pull us out of it. It was just a neat moment, and I think they did that really well. There's just so many interesting things that happen. A lot of creativity here. Even a lot of the side characters are interesting. Like the guy with the pirate with the wooden eye. It's just some little thing, right, that didn't have to be there, but it adds a lot of texture and nuance to the story. And that's just one example. A lot of the characters are interesting, visually interesting, and they each have their own personality. And they just did such a good job with it, with filling out the cast. And then I like, as far as the main characters go, I like how they're written to stand up for each other, right? They risk their own well-being for the others. Each of them does at one point or another in the story. And it allows us to root for characters that could potentially be darker, right? This is about pirates. In real life, pirates aren't so great. They weren't so great back then for the most part. These are people who are criminals and murderers and thieves and all kinds of bad things. But, this is a Disney movie. So they're making it fun. And, we're playing off of the sort of swashbuckling adventure stories that we get about pirates rather than the real world pirates. And so having the characters be much more likable, having them be more fun, having them care about each other makes us more invested in the story. And I think they did that well. I was trying to figure out the focus of the story in terms of its division of plot, characters, or setting, which one kind of pulled through the most. Because we've talked about stories where it's clearly more character focused or it's clearly more plot focused, and sometimes the setting is a bigger deal. And I think in this movie, at least from my perspective, it felt like all three of those were fairly equally represented, right? You don't get a Pirates of the Caribbean movie based on a Disney ride without the setting being quite important to what you're seeing. And I think we see that here. The setting and the world building suffuses the whole movie, right? It's extremely important. It sets up the plot, right? The whole curse comes from the setting of this movie and the backstory and the world building that they've created. So that's clearly important. The plot is important because it's driving everything that's happening, the curse that's going on and the conflicts between the characters. And it drives the motivation of the characters, either directly or indirectly, depending on which character you're following. And as far as the characters go, they do grow over the course of story. We do see the relationships grow. We do see the individual character growth, but it's clearly not the primary focus of the story. So I think maybe it's an even split between plot, characters, and setting for this movie, and it works. But I'm open to hearing your thoughts on that too. So yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was very fun. There's a lot going for it, and I'm amazed that they made such a good movie off of a ride. And not only that, they created a franchise that's spawned at least 4 other movies to this point. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. And as a matter of fact, the first thing that I wrote down in my notes echoes one of the first things that you said, the setups and the payoffs. Really beautifully done. I mean, they were very thoughtful about how they set up the story and then paid it off at the end, which is part of what makes it work. So I agree 100% with you. And I also agree about the characters. One of the things that I was focusing on when I was listening to this was the introduction of our characters, all the characters that, the main characters and even the side characters that we got to meet in the very first 5 minutes. And we learned exactly what their needs are and their goals are right away.
Yeah.
Right? Elizabeth's goals are to learn about pirates. She's fascinated by pirates. Right away, you learn that she's interested in pirates. You learn that Norrington is about following the rules. He is going to follow the rules, implement the law, be an upstanding person.
Yeah.
Governor Swan, his primary goal in life is his daughter. He loves his daughter. You see him when they realize that there are pirates nearby and there's this ship and there could be ugly things. He very lovingly says to her, he will be in your charge. And the whole point of that, of her taking care of Will, is not to take care of Will, but to take care of her, keep her out of harm's way, but give her a job to do. He doesn't undercut her and say, oh, I'm afraid you're going to get hurt, go hide. No, he gives her a job. So he's just such a loving dad, and you can see that right away. That's his goal, to be the loving dad, to take care of his daughter. The only one we don't, even Gibbs, which is really fascinating. I was actually focused a lot on Gibbs this time for some reason, and I'll explain why in a little bit more. Gibbs is all about luck, right? It's bad luck to have a woman on board, even a miniature one. True. Bad luck to talk about pirates, right? He's all about luck. And so you get these pictures of all these characters, and the only one you don't learn about is Will Turner. You meet him and then, he passes out. And you don't really learn anything about him until much later on in the story, which is, I think, really interesting. And then when we're introduced to Jack, one of the things that I realized here, and I think I've realized this before, but it stood out again for me this time, is Jack is almost a cartoon character in comparison to everyone else. Everyone else is very realistic, down to earth. We can all relate to them. And Jack sort of appears bigger than life.
Yeah.
Almost not real, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And what was really interesting to me is something that my offspring said, so credit where credit is due, because as soon as this was said, I was like, wow, I never thought about it that way, but this is a really good point. Jack Sparrow, the character of Jack Sparrow, is a very lucky character. He's got a lot of luck, and he's got a lot of smarts too. But it's interesting too, if you look at it in perspective of luck, because that IMDb summary that I read says that he arrives at an inopportune moment just before the pirates arrive. Except it's not inopportune, because his goal is the Pearl. We learned that pretty fast too. He's looking to get back to the Pearl. And so to be at Port Royal when the Pearl arrives is not inopportune. It's lucky. And my offspring even said that's why Gibbs signs up with Jack, because Gibbs recognizes that Jack has good luck. Which that was a brilliant observation. Yeah. My point is that Jack is this very interesting character because he's almost not real. I wanted to echo what you said about, pirates in reality are really bad people. They assault, they murder, they do terrible things and leave people's lives in shambles. So how do you make a good story about pirates? And like you said, they made it a swashbuckling story, but they also turned the pirates into a culture so that you're interested in learning about the culture. Like when they're talking about the code.
Yeah, the code.
What's the code? Where did it come about? There's a history. There's rules. There's some kind of cultural layers involved in being a pirate that are talked about almost right away. And that you kind of get this feel. So you're interested in learning more because a lot of people are interested in learning about culture. And this goes to your point about the blend of the plot and the characters and the world. And that's part of the world that then helps the characters be not so bad when we meet the pirates because you're interested in the culture. And speaking of not so bad, I think one of the things that is really fascinating, and I think this is how they also work with the ugliness of actual pirating, is that this story focuses a lot on what good means. You hear about he's a pirate, but he's a good man.
Yeah.
In a way, I almost saw this as a contrast with the difference between good and following the rules. Because at the end, Norrington doesn't follow the rules so he can do something good. And Barbossa is not good, but he follows the rules for the most part. Yeah. They're more like guidelines.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I just thought it was an interesting contrast between what's good and what's following rules and how good can take place where there are people who are bad and bad can take place where people are following the rules. Now, I am going to, like you, I'm going to make a confession here. I too love this series. The first three. I wasn't really that hooked after the next ones didn't really do anything for me. But the first three I think are really good. So a lot of these observations are informed by what comes after. So I have to be really transparent about that. I can't help but be informed by what I know happens after and then projecting back to this movie as I'm watching it again. I may not have realized this on a first watch if it was fresh. So there's that.
Yeah,
But
still good
yeah,
insight though.
is there anything that you might have done differently as a writer?
There's a couple things I thought of. This is maybe not so much writing as directing, but I might shorten some of the action sequences.
Yes.
While all the stuff is fun, I did find myself 2 or 3 times during action scenes wondering what we were doing here, like what was the plot and what was at stake, because like I kind of like got lost and like it goes on for a while. I'm like, wait, what brought us to this point again? Why is this happening? So even though their scenes are always fun and well done, it did feel a bit as if the plot and character development took a pause, like, oh, now it's time for an action scene. We're going to forget the story for a while and have this showcase scene. So they did feel a bit like that. Again, that's maybe more directing, but I think if you have writing in the action scenes as opposed to just now a fight scene occurs, right? If you have more dialogue and more story going on during the scene, it helps carry you through and you don't forget what was happening before, right? So that may be one thing. I do wish the Elizabeth Swann character had some specific skill she could have used at some point. It did feel like she spent most of the time being just a damsel in distress. So I would have given her something of her own in this movie. Her whole thing was basically that she was the one who had the medallion, and like that was her deal. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more for her character, give her a little bit more of a drive and some kind of skill or something. And then likewise, I would have liked to have seen the governor have some motivation and depth beyond just being her father. Because like you pointed out, it's like his whole thing was concern for her, which is great. But like, isn't he supposed to be like the governor? Shouldn't he be like governing and doing stuff and having some authority and showing some strength or something? And I didn't see any of that. And I would have liked to have seen at least 1 or 2 moments of that. So those are some of the things that I noted. Is there anything that you saw that you would improve? And what do you think about my note?
Well, I'm going to talk about your notes because I agree and I disagree. So we'll get into that right now. So as far as the action scenes are concerned, yes, I agree. Listening to it, those action scenes actually seem longer because
Yeah, I bet.
it's just music and shouting and really good Foley work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. I always remember thinking, wow, I don't think I realized how long this action stuff was. I'm going to disagree about Elizabeth though. And this is why. Because one of the things I noted when I did watch some of it, when I was at a place where I could actually look at it, I did watch some of it. Well, first of all, she was agentive when she took the medallion. She took the medallion because she was afraid this boy was going to be labeled a pirate after just being told by Norrington that he was going to hang all pirates. So she didn't want to see this boy hanged. So she took the medallion. So that was sort of agentive right away. She had enough wherewithal to draw that connection and she took it. Then when the pirates come and attack the mansion, she's telling the maid to go to the fort so that somebody knows what's going on. She's running and trying to fight back. She goes up into the parlor or the dining room, whatever, and finds a shield with crossed swords on it, which, by the way, we used to have something like that in our house when I was a kid. And tries to pull the sword out, which I also tried to do when I was a kid, but it didn't work either. She tries to pull the sword out. So she is trying to exercise skills that she was probably never taught because she was a fine young woman. I think she's trying to have skills that are outside of what was the expectation of a woman of means in that particular time period. And then, of course, she sets fire to the rum to create a signal fire. That's pretty smart. So she's got a lot of intelligence, and now that she's free of being the governor's daughter, as she's roaming around the Caribbean, she's starting to utilize some of her intelligence to figure out how to solve her problems. So I'm going to kind of disagree with you on that one a little bit.
Okay, so yeah, maybe her skill or her attribute is adaptability, right? She can go with things on the fly and learn and think. Yeah, I like that.
The other thing that, for me, that I made note of that I might have wanted to change as a writer is the number of piratisms, as I'm calling them, that were in the dialogue. As I listened to it, it felt a little heavy-handed, like catch him in the crossfire and send them down to Old Hob, or going to be lost to Davy Jones' locker. I mean, those are all very cliche phrases that are used in swashbuckling pirate movies, etc. And so I understand why they did them, but it felt a little heavy-handed in this movie, and I don't think it's quite as heavy-handed in the next movies, but as it was this time. And the only time that I think it really worked was when Will, having joined Jack Sparrow to try to take the Dauntless, I guess, or the Interceptor or whatever, says avast. And it's done for comedy.
Yeah.
Then it sort of worked for me. And I think a lot of those piratisms should have been done a little bit more for comedy than for... And maybe it was trying to add to the culture piece. You know, that there's these phrases that the pirates use. That's part of the culture. Maybe that was part of it, but it stood out this time for me.
I wonder if some of that doesn't come from the ride. I remember seeing there'd be like signs, you know, as you're going through the ride about Davy Jones' locker and things like that, maybe.
Yeah,
And
but you don't have to use them all.
No, but you know, a lot of times that ends up being the case. Like, oh, this thing's in here and this thing's in here. Let's put that, you know, almost Easter eggy.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite rides at Disneyland.
Oh yeah, I love that ride.
And Haunted Mansion is the other one.
Yeah. And
when I would go as an adult with the younger offspring, I would nap in the Haunted Mansion. It's a great place to take a nap. Okay, so all right, so I can understand what you're suggesting here, and that they were really trying to stay with the feeling of the ride and the things that you can find in the ride, almost like Easter eggs. So yeah, I can see that. So let's talk about themes. Did you pull any themes from Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of things you can get from here, just from, you know, what we were talking about. You brought up some good things. The one that I had come up with was basically like, you know, friendship, right? You should be willing to step up and protect those you care about. I think all three of the main characters do that at some point during this movie, either risking their lives, their reputation, or their freedom. So yes, that's the theme that I got. What do you get? I pulled
from my observation of this compare and contrast of good versus following rules. I just pulled good. Good is more than following rules. Even like take Norrington's proposal, right? He is all about following the rules and upholding things. He said this, how did he put it? This promotion brings into sharp relief that which I do not have, a marriage to a fine woman. It's not that he loves her. It's just that the next thing on the checkbox of following the rules is getting married.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it doesn't come across as like really grasping and cold. He seems to care about her. Yeah. But his reason for proposing is like, okay, this is next on the list. What do you think?
That's funny. So, yeah, I like that. So, I like that he was willing to step aside for Will at the end too.
Yeah. Which means because he is a good guy.
Yeah. Even though he was an antagonist for part of the movie, he's not a villain.
Yes. And his character arc through the whole 3 movie series is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you take away from Pirates of the Caribbean as a writer?
For me, the thing that I noticed, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to take away, a lot of which we've talked about before. Something we hadn't is what I take away from this, which is having a story that you can blend almost evenly between plot, character, and setting and still make it work. That was interesting. Yeah, I like that. That's my takeaway. Cool. What is your takeaway?
And my takeaway is that, you know, like as you pointed out, they turned a ride. Now the ride does have a story. I mean, when you go on the ride, there is a little bit of a story element. You move from room to room, which are scenes to scenes, and you can piece together a story. But that story really wouldn't work if it wasn't for the characters. And so they grounded us with the characters almost immediately. And so to me, this whole movie wouldn't have worked if they didn't have these incredibly well-crafted characters with very understandable needs and very logical story arcs. What happened in each point of the movie pushing things forward were about the characters. The characters drove what was happening here. And I thought that was really well done. And so I just wrote, it's all about the characters, because that was really what stood out for me.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the movie The Fifth Element. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.